Elvis Presley, the name still buzzes. In the late 1950s, he was everything. He was the gyrating hips, the slicked back hair, the voice that made teenagers scream and parents clutch their pearls. He changed music. He changed youth culture. He was the biggest star the world had ever seen, selling millions of records, starring in movies, appearing on TV. Then, in 1957, the letter came. It was a draft notice. Serial number 53,310,761. Everyone expected special treatment. A cushy job, perhaps singing for the troops, a public relations role. But March 24th, 1958, Elvis reported for duty. He became Private Presley.
The world watched.
The ultimate rebel, the symbol of youth rebellion, was getting a haircut. A military haircut. It was more than just hair. It was a statement. It was a transformation. It was a massive media spectacle playing out in newspapers, on radio, and in newsreels across the globe. Why did this matter so much? Why did a rock star serving his country become such a defining moment, not just for him, but for America? What did it say about celebrity, duty, youth, and the very idea of what it meant to be an American man in the midst of the Cold War? This wasn't just about Elvis going to the army. It was about how America and the world reacted to it. It was about how an icon was shaped and how he, in turn, shaped the narrative of his time. It was a spectacle that had layers, meanings, and consequences that echo even today. Number 15, the military's masterstroke. How did the U.S. Army leverage Elvis for its own image? The U.S. Army in the 1950s, it needed a facelift. World War II heroes were still respected, but the peacetime draft, that was not always popular. The Cold War was brewing, and the country needed to maintain a strong, positive image of its military. It needed good recruits. Then, the biggest star on the planet, Elvis Presley, got his draft notice. This was a gift, a massive, unexpected gift for military public relations. The Army didn't hesitate. They saw the potential. A global superstar, a regular GI, it was an unparalleled opportunity. They could use Elvis to push a powerful message. It said that the Army treated everyone equally. No one, not even the king of rock and roll, was above serving his country. This was a strong counter to any idea of an elitist military. It showed discipline, it showed patriotism. It suggested that the military could take anyone, even a wild rock star, and make a man out of them. They could instill character and duty. The Army knew the media would follow Elvis, so they facilitated it. They gave unprecedented access, reporters, photographers, newsreel crews. They were there when he got his haircut at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. They documented his basic training at Fort Hood, Texas. They filmed his departure for Germany. Every step was recorded. The images of Elvis in his uniform, cleaning his rifle, polishing his boots, these were distributed worldwide. They weren't just pictures of a famous person, they were advertisements for the American way of life for military service. His serial number, 53,310,761, became famous. He was Private Presley, not Elvis the Pelvis. This emphasized his role as a soldier first. This narrative was carefully managed. The Army promoted the idea that he wasn't getting special treatment. He cleaned barracks, he stood guard, he went on maneuvers. While some might argue he still received certain perks, like living off base in Germany later, the initial image of a regular GI was powerful. It humanized the military for many. It made service seem more accessible, even aspirational. The implicit message was simple and direct. If Elvis can do it, so can you. If the Army is good enough for the king, it's good enough for anyone. This boosted morale, and it surely helped in recruitment efforts. The Army basically got 2 years of free, positive, global advertising from the biggest celebrity in the world. It was a masterstroke in public relations. What we still do not know, how much specific planning went into the Army's handling of Elvis's image, beyond just treating him like a regular soldier. Did the Army genuinely believe it transformed Elvis, or was it purely about using his existing fame? What specific internal discussions happened within the Pentagon about how to manage the King's draft and its public impact? Number 14, Colonel Parker's genius, or folly was the draft a calculated career move, or a crisis managed? Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was a character. He was a former carnival barker, a master showman, a genius at promotion. He controlled every single aspect of Elvis's career. So when the draft notice came, it was a massive challenge. 2 years out of the spotlight could kill a career. For most stars, it would have been devastating. But Parker saw an opportunity, his decision, and it was largely his decision, to insist that Elvis serve as a regular soldier, not in special services, was highly unusual. Most celebrities got entertainment duty. They put on shows for the troops, they posed for pictures. Parker said no. He stated, Elvis will serve his country, just like any other American boy. This was pure genius from a public relations standpoint. It turned a potential career interruption into a patriotic triumph. And Elvis, serving like everyone else, made him relatable. It cleaned up his dangerous image. The gyrating rebel became a clean-cut, respectable soldier. This broadened his appeal significantly, bringing in older, more conservative audiences who had previously disapproved of his music. It transformed him from a cultural threat into a national hero. Parker also understood the power of absence. Absence, he knew, makes the heart grow fonder. 2 years away created massive anticipation for his return. He didn't let Elvis disappear entirely. Parker ensured a steady stream of pre-recorded music was released during his service. Albums like King Creole, which had already been filmed, came out while he was in the Army. Singles like A Big Hunk o' Love were released from his backlog. Merchandise sales continued. Parker kept Elvis in the public consciousness, even when he wasn't physically present. This strategy also helped Elvis avoid the scandals that plagued other rock and roll stars of the era, like Chuck Berry's legal troubles or Jerry Lee Lewis's marriage scandal. Elvis was safely tucked away in the Army, untouchable. It protected his image and his career. Some people might call it a folly. 2 years is a long time in show business. The gamble was huge. Some argue this move, while brilliant for his image and wealth, ultimately softened Elvis too much. It might have set the stage for his later, more formulaic movie career, where the raw edge of his early music was lost. But at the time, Parker made a very difficult situation into a monumental success. He kept the brand alive, transformed it, and set the stage for an even bigger comeback. What we still do not know, how much of Parker's decision was truly about opportunism versus a genuine belief in the moral correctness of Elvis serving. Did Parker fully understand the long-term artistic impact on Elvis, or only his bankability? What specific pressures did Parker face from the military or public to handle Elvis's draft in a particular way? This number 13, the fading rebel. Did the Army haircut kill rock and roll's edge? Before the Army, Elvis was the living embodiment of rebellion. His music was raw. His movements were provocative. He was dangerous to parents, thrilling to teenagers. Rock and roll, through him, was an anti-establishment force. It challenged norms. It pushed boundaries. Then came the Army, and with the Army, the haircut. That haircut. It happened at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, on March 25th, 1958. It wasn't just a physical change. It was a massive symbolic act. That famous pompadour, the one that screamed rebel, was shorn. It was replaced by a regulation military cut. This wasn't just losing hair, it was a visible stripping away of his persona. It signaled conformity, it signaled discipline, it cut away his rebel image, literally and figuratively. Elvis's absence and his transformation happened at a critical time for rock and roll. Other early pioneers faced big scandals. Chuck Berry was arrested, Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin, Little Richard found religion and quit rock and roll for a time. Rock and roll, which had burst onto the scene with such raw energy, suddenly seemed to lose its edge. It entered a quieter, tamer phase. When Elvis was gone, a vacuum formed. Into that vacuum stepped new, safer teen idols. Frankie Avalon, Fabian, Bobby Rydell. They were clean-cut. Their music was lighter. It was pop, not the aggressive blues-infused rock that Elvis had pioneered. The wildness, the danger, much of that was put on hold. The British invasion, which would inject new energy and rebellion into rock, was still years away. Many music historians argue that Elvis's Army stint, combined with his later, more commercial movie career, effectively domesticated him. It took the edge off not just Elvis, but off rock and roll itself. It became more mainstream. It became less threatening. The industry learned that rebellion could be packaged, made safe, and sold to a wider audience. The Army, in a way, helped make rock and roll palatable to the very parents who once condemned it. The rebel king became the good soldier, and for some, that meant the real, dangerous heart of rock and roll faded a little bit. And what we still do not know, would rock and roll have maintained its raw edge if Elvis had never served in the military? Did the army truly kill the rebel Elvis, or was that transformation inevitable with age and career demands? Could any other star have filled the void he left, or was his absence uniquely impactful for the genre? Number 12, Youth Culture's Shifting Sands. How did Elvis's enlistment reflect anxieties about teenagers? The 1950s saw the birth of the teenager as a distinct social group. They had their own music, their own fashion, their own spending money. They weren't just mini adults anymore. This new demographic, with its newfound power, often caused a lot of anxiety for adults. The teenagers were seen as rebellious, sometimes misunderstood, and even dangerous. Elvis Presley was right at the center of this. He embodied this new challenging youth culture. His music, his dancing, his raw sexuality on stage, it was all seen as incredibly threatening by many adults. He was often blamed for juvenile delinquency, for corrupting the morals of the youth. Parents were genuinely worried about their children listening to that noise and being swayed by that man. Moral panic was a real thing, and Elvis was often the target. So when Elvis got drafted, it offered a curious kind of reassurance to those anxious parents. The military at that time was widely viewed as a character-building institution. It was designed to take young men and turn them into disciplined, responsible adults. Elvis's transformation into a clean-cut, obedient soldier offered a very comforting narrative. It was a story that suggested even the wildest, most rebellious youth could be tamed, could be made into a good citizen. The media played into this. News reports and images highlighted Elvis's journey from rock and roll idol to dutiful private. It was a narrative of maturation, of conformity to societal expectations. For parents worried about their kids' independence and their embrace of new, unfamiliar culture, Elvis in uniform was a powerful symbol. It suggested that traditional values could still prevail. This wasn't just about Elvis. It was about what Elvis represented to a generation that felt their world was changing too fast. He was a symbol of generational divide. His enlistment became a public demonstration that even the biggest rebel had to eventually conform, had to take on adult responsibilities. It provided a moment of shared understanding, perhaps, between anxious parents and their rock and roll loving children, showing that patriotism and duty could bridge the gap. What we still do not know, did Elvis's army service truly alleviate parental anxieties about youth culture, or just shift them to other figures like the beatniks or later folk singers? Was the military seen as a necessary reset button for celebrities who became too wild in the public eye? How did the youth themselves, those who loved the rebel Elvis, truly feel about their idol being disciplined by the establishment? Number 11A, Nation's Son. How did Elvis's service unite a divided American public? Before the army, Elvis Presley was a deeply polarizing figure in America. Teenagers absolutely adored him. They screamed, they swooned, but many adults, especially older, more conservative ones, detested him. They saw him as vulgar, they thought his music was trash, they believed he was a corrupting influence on their children, a symbol of everything wrong with modern youth. He divided families even. Then came the draft, and Elvis's decision to serve as a regular soldier without special treatment. This was the ultimate equalizer. Duty to country, patriotism. These were values that resonated deeply with nearly all Americans, regardless of their feelings about rock and roll. His service transcended the cultural divide he had previously embodied. Suddenly, Elvis wasn't just Elvis the Pelvis. He was Private Presley. He was a son of America, fulfilling his civic duty. This transformed him. He went from being a controversial rock star to a national hero. He was no longer just for the teenagers. He was for everyone who believed in service, in country. The media pushed this narrative hard. Images of Elvis in uniform, saluting, marching, getting his hair cut. These were carefully curated to show a young man humbly doing his part. It allowed parents and grandparents who had once condemned him to suddenly approve of him. They could say, "See, he's a good boy after all." It provided a common ground, a way for different generations to bridge their cultural differences, at least on the surface. This wasn't about erasing the differences in music taste. It was about finding a shared value, patriotism. In the Cold War era, with America standing against communism, the image of its biggest star serving without complaint was incredibly powerful. It made him a symbol of American strength and unity. It showed that even the most individualistic icon would put country first. For a moment, The nation felt a sense of pride in him that went beyond his music. And he became our boy, a unifying figure, even if that unity was somewhat superficial and driven by a carefully managed public image. What we still do not know was this newfound unity genuinely felt across all segments of American society, or was it a temporary truce based on a manufactured image? Did the underlying generational and cultural divides truly heal, or were they just momentarily overshadowed by patriotic sentiment? How did the youth who loved the rebel Elvis truly feel about his transformation into a nation's son and the way it made him more palatable to adults? Number 10, the global phenomenon. What did Elvis in Germany mean for America's image abroad? When Elvis Presley was stationed in Germany in October 1958, it was more than just a troop deployment. It was a massive cultural event. Post-World War II Germany was still recovering. West Germany, where Elvis was based, was a crucial Cold War ally, a frontline state against the Soviet Union. And American troops were a constant presence, sometimes a source of tension, sometimes a source of cultural exchange. Elvis's arrival in Friedberg, Germany, caused a sensation. Local media went wild. As German fans, especially young girls, flocked to try and catch a glimpse of him. He wasn't just another American soldier, he was Elvis. His presence allowed for a very direct, very human interaction between a global American icon and the local population. He dated German women, most notably Priscilla Beaulieu, who he would later marry. He lived among them. This had a significant impact on America's soft power. Soft power is about cultural influence, the ability to attract and co-opt rather than coerce. Elvis embodied American culture not just as a rock star, but now as a soldier. This merged the irresistible appeal of American entertainment with the strength and discipline of the American military presence. He was a symbol of America's vibrant, free culture, serving in uniform to protect that freedom. And news reports and photos of Elvis in Germany showed him as a good, well-behaved soldier. This contrasted with some negative stereotypes of American GIs abroad. He was seen as polite, accessible, and dedicated to his duty. This helped to burnish America's image in a key allied nation. It showed that America valued its allies and was serious about its defense commitments, while also having a dynamic and appealing culture. His uniform was not just a military uniform, it was a uniform of American cultural diplomacy. His service in Germany was a unique blend of national defense and cultural ambassadorship, all wrapped up in the global phenomenon of Elvis Presley. What we still do not know, how deeply did Elvis's presence in Germany truly affect German youth and popular culture beyond the immediate sensation and fan frenzy? Did his service abroad significantly change the perception of American soldiers among the German population, especially the older generations? What was the long-term impact of his time in Germany on Elvis's own understanding of the world, his global fame, or his personal relationships? Number 9. Gender and masculinity. How did the Army transform Elvis from sex symbol to American man? Before the Army, Elvis Presley was a disruptive force regarding gender norms. He was a teen idol, often called Elvis the Pelvis. His gyrating hips and sensual stage presence were seen as both exciting and deeply threatening. To many older conservative Americans, especially men, he was seen as too flamboyant, too effeminate, a challenge to traditional masculinity. He wasn't the stoic, strong, masculine figure they expected. He was a sexualized object, which was alarming to some. The Army, however, was seen as the ultimate crucible of masculinity in 1950s America. It was designed to take boys and turn them into real men. It was a place where individuality was stripped away and replaced with discipline, conformity, and a very specific idea of what it meant to be a man. Elvis's enlistment fit right into this narrative. The iconic haircut was central to this transformation. That long, greasy pompadour, which was part of his rebel image, was shorn. It was a literal shearing of what was perceived as his feminine or overly sexualized qualities. He was given a standard military cut. His flamboyant stage clothes were replaced with a simple, standardized uniform. He became one of many, indistinguishable in appearance, disciplined in action. The message sent was clear. Elvis, the wild sex symbol, was being tamed. He was becoming a real man, a soldier, a patriot. This transformation made him much more acceptable to a wider, more conservative audience. He became less of a threat and more of a model. He went from a dangerous, sexually charged figure to a safe, respectable pinup boy for the nation. This was a crucial part of his image makeover, making him palatable to the very people who had once condemned him. His service in the army didn't just transform his career, it fundamentally reshaped his public image of masculinity, aligning it with traditional American values. What we still do not know, did Elvis himself feel emasculated or empowered by this public transformation into a more traditional man? How much did this army-imposed masculinity clash with his natural charisma and stage persona? And how did he reconcile those internally? Did this highly publicized shift in his gender presentation affect his private life, his relationships, or his own sense of self as a man and an artist? Number 8. The business of stardom. How did his team keep his career alive while he was away? 2 years is an eternity in show business. For a star as big as Elvis Presley, going away for military service was a huge risk. But Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was a master strategist. He wasn't going to let his golden goose disappear entirely. He had a plan, and it was brilliant. Parker knew he couldn't have Elvis physically present, but he could keep his presence alive in the public consciousnness. His first move was to strategically release pre-recorded material. Elvis had been busy in the studio before he left. Songs like Hard-Headed Woman and A Big Hunk of Love were released as singles while he was in basic training or overseas. The soundtrack for his film King Creole, which was his last movie before entering the army, was also released during this period. These releases ensured Elvis's music stayed on the charts and on the radio. And beyond music, Parker carefully managed other aspects of the business. Merchandise sales continued. Elvis-branded items, from guitars to fan magazines, were still available. The public couldn't see new performances, but they could still buy into the Elvis brand. Letters from Elvis, carefully vetted by Parker, were sometimes shared with the press or fan clubs, giving fans a glimpse into his life as a soldier. Photos of him in uniform were constantly in circulation, reinforcing his image as a dutiful serviceman. Though Parker made sure that the public never quite forgot about Elvis, he created anticipation for his return. Financially, Elvis made very little as a soldier, initially just $78 a month. But Parker ensured that his assets were protected and that his future income potential remained sky high. He maintained lucrative contracts and kept negotiations ongoing for future projects. By the time Elvis was discharged in March 1960, he wasn't a forgotten star. He was an eagerly awaited icon. Parker's meticulous planning meant that Elvis's career didn't just survive the army, it was strengthened and poised for an even bigger, more mainstream phase. He proved that even a star's absence could be a powerful marketing tool. What we still do not know, how much money did Colonel Parker himself accrue during Elvis's 2 years in the army, especially compared to Elvis's own military pay? Was this strategy of maintaining a star's presence during military service an entirely new invention by Parker? Or did he perfect an existing, lesser-known model? What would have been the ultimate fate of Elvis's career if Parker hadn't been so meticulously strategic in keeping his name and music alive? Number 7, the media's feast. How did newspapers, radio, and TV cover every step of his military service? The media went absolutely wild for Elvis in the army. Like, it was an unprecedented level of coverage for a draftee, or really for almost anyone at that time. From the moment his draft notice became public knowledge until his honorable discharge, almost 2 years later, every single step was documented. Newspapers ran front-page headlines, radio stations provided hourly updates. Newsreels and movie theaters showed footage of him. It was an Elvis watch that captivated the nation and indeed the world. His haircut, on March 25, 1958, was treated like a global event. Newsreel cameras recorded it, and photos were beamed around the world. It wasn't just a haircut, it was a symbolic moment that everyone wanted to see. His departure from Fort Hood for Germany and his arrival there were also heavily covered. Reporters followed him, photographers snapped pictures, the media turned his military service into a running serial, a continuous story that audiences devoured. This was happening at a time when television was becoming a dominant force in American homes. Newsreels were still important for visual news. Newspapers had massive circulations. The combination of these mediums meant that almost no one could escape the Elvis story. The media narrative generally focused on his transformation. It highlighted his patriotism, his humility, his willingness to serve, just like any other guy. It built him up as a good soldier, a credit to his country. While the reporting was largely respectful, the sheer volume and constant focus on every detail, from his basic training drills to his off-duty activities in Germany, was a form of sensationalism in itself. It kept him in the public eye constantly. This relentless coverage wasn't accidental. The Army, recognizing the massive public interest, often facilitated media access, making it easier for reporters and photographers to follow Elvis. They understood the public relations value of having the biggest star in the world serving in their ranks. It was a symbiotic relationship. The media got a guaranteed bestseller, and the Army got unparalleled exposure and a positive image. The entire 2 years became a continuous global media event. What we still do not know, did the media's relentless coverage truly create the spectacle surrounding Elvis's service, or did it merely reflect an already existing and intense public fascination? How much did the military actively facilitate this level of media access, and what specific guidelines or restrictions were put in place for reporting on the celebrity soldier? Was there any significant negative or critical reporting of his military service that might have been overshadowed by the overwhelmingly positive narrative? Number 6, the King's vulnerability. How did the draft reveal the human side of an icon? Before the draft, Elvis Presley seemed almost invincible. He was a larger-than-life figure, a rock and roll god to millions. He commanded stages, inspired hysteria, and seemed to exist on a different plane than ordinary people. He was the king untouchable. Then came the draft notice. It was a universal experience for young men in America at that time. And it immediately stripped him of his superstar aura. It showed that he was not above the law, not exempt from civic duty. He became Private Presley, with a serial number, just like any other recruit. This was a profound moment of humanization. The most iconic image of this vulnerability was his haircut. On March 25th, 1958, cameras recorded as his famous pompadour was shorn. Losing that hair was more than a style change. It was a visible, tangible symbol of him letting go of his rock and roll persona and conforming to the uniform requirements of the military. He looked, for the first time, like any other young man going through basic training. He looked quite simply vulnerable. During basic training at Fort Hood, Texas, he mopped floors, polished shoes, stood guard, and drilled alongside other soldiers. There were no special privileges, at least initially. He was doing the same mundane, difficult tasks as everyone else. This made him incredibly relatable to the average American. They saw him struggling, sweating, following orders. It pulled back the curtain on the superstar and showed the human being underneath. The public reaction was significant. Many people, even those who had previously disapproved of his rock and roll antics, admired his humility and willingness to serve. It transformed him from a cultural rebel into a patriotic son. This period revealed a quieter, more subdued side of Elvis, a side that seemed genuinely affected by his duty and his personal losses, like his mother's death. It reminded everyone that despite the fame, the money, the screams, Elvis was still a person, subject to the same obligations and emotional challenges as anyone else. What we still do not know was this public display of vulnerability genuinely experienced by Elvis, or was it a carefully curated performance for the cameras and the public? Did the public truly see him as just one of us, or was the underlying celebrity always subtly present, affecting how they viewed his humanity? How much did the military strategically exploit this humanization for its own public relations benefit, beyond just allowing access? Number 5, family and sacrifice. What was the personal cost of his service, especially his mother's death? Elvis Presley was famously intensely close to his mother, Gladys Presley. She was the anchor in his life, his confidante, his biggest supporter. He often said she was the most important person to him. Her health had been failing even before he entered the Army, but her well-being was a constant worry for him. The emotional toll of his separation from her was immediate and profound. He was heartbroken to leave her when he reported for duty. Then, while he was in basic training at Fort Hood, Texas, news came that she was gravely ill. Elvis was granted emergency leave, a rare privilege, to rush home to Memphis. He arrived just in time. Gladys died on August 14, 1958, at the age of 46. Her death was a devastating blow to Elvis. He was visibly distraught, inconsolable. Photographs from the funeral show a man utterly consumed by grief, barely able to stand. This tragedy, occurring in the middle of his military service, highlighted the immense personal sacrifice he was making. It showed the human vulnerability beneath the superstar facade. It also, in retrospect, marked a turning point in his life. Many close to him felt he never fully recovered from her loss. To help him cope and to provide some semblance of home, his father, Vernon Presley, and his grandmother, Minnie May Hood Presley, accompanied him to Germany when he was deployed later that year. This was an unusual arrangement for a private, but it showed the depth of his family bond and his need for their presence. They lived together off base, creating a small family unit in a foreign land. His mother's death underscored that despite his fame and wealth, Elvis was still a son, capable of profound grief. It added a layer of pathos to the media spectacle of Elvis in the Army. It wasn't just about duty and patriotism, it was about immense personal loss suffered while serving his country. This sacrifice, so publicly displayed, further cemented his image as a man of depth and feeling, making him even more endearing to many. The cost of his service for Elvis was not just time, but an irreplaceable part of his soul. What we still do not know, how much did his mother's death during his military service truly affect Elvis's psyche, his decision-making, and his career choices going forward? Did her absence create a void he never truly filled, potentially contributing to later struggles with loneliness or reliance on others? To what extent did the military or Colonel Parker provide adequate emotional support to Elvis through this profound personal loss, or was he largely left to grieve alone? Number 4, authenticity versus performance. Was his army stint a genuine duty or a highly orchestrated performance? The official story was clear. Elvis Presley chose to serve as a regular soldier. He famously stated, "I don't want to be a specialist. I'll take my chances with the rest of the boys." This statement and his subsequent actions were largely interpreted as a genuine commitment to duty, a star humbling himself for his country. But behind the scenes, the lines between authenticity and performance were often blurred. Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, played a crucial role. Many speculate that Parker saw immense public relations potential in a clean-cut, patriotic Elvis. He might have actively advised against special service or entertainment duty, preferring the narrative of the star serving, just like everyone else. This would transform Elvis from a controversial rebel into a national hero, broadening his appeal. So, while Elvis's words suggested personal conviction, Parker's strategic mind was undoubtedly at work. The media access was unprecedented for a recruit. Every haircut, every drill, every departure was documented. This constant media presence turned his military service into a continuous public show. It made it difficult to distinguish between Elvis the soldier doing his duty and Elvis the performer aware of the cameras. Was he performing the role of the good soldier for the cameras and the public? Or was it an authentic transformation, a genuine embrace of military discipline and duty? The accounts from fellow soldiers are mixed. Some remembered him as a regular guy, approachable, doing his part. They said he was just another soldier once the cameras were gone. Others noted the constant media attention, the preferential treatment that sometimes occurred, and the underlying celebrity that never truly faded. While he wasn't doing concerts, he was still Elvis. He bought a camera for his platoon, for example, a generous gesture, but also a reminder of his wealth. It's likely a blend of both. Elvis, a product of Southern working class values, probably felt a genuine sense of duty. His mother's death during his service deeply affected him and underscored the seriousness of his commitment. But he was also a natural performer, and he operated under the strict management of Colonel Parker. The good soldier narrative served his career well. It's hard to separate the genuine man from the manufactured image when an icon is under such intense public scrutiny. What we still do not know, to what extent was Elvis's decision to serve in the regular army truly his own, independent of Colonel Parker's strategic influence and the pressures of celebrity? How much of the good soldier image was an authentic internal change for Elvis versus an external performance driven by public relations and the expectations placed upon him? Could Elvis have chosen a different path for his military service? And if so, what specific reasons or pressures might have led him to opt for the regular GI role? Number 3. Race and integration. Did Elvis's service implicitly address or ignore the racial undertones of early rock? But early rock and roll was fundamentally rooted in black music rhythm and blues, gospel, country blues. Elvis Presley, a white performer, became the face of this new sound, bringing it to a massive white mainstream audience. This brought huge success, but also accusations of stealing or profiting from black culture, a debate that continues to this day. America in 1958 was still deeply segregated, especially in the South. Civil rights was a simmering, then boiling movement. The military, however, had officially desegregated in 1948 under President Truman. So, when Elvis entered the Army, he was serving in an integrated institution. He trained, drilled, and lived alongside men of all races. This was a visible reality of his service, even if it wasn't explicitly highlighted in the media as a statement on race. Elvis himself never made explicit public statements about civil rights during his Army service. His focus was on his duty, his family, and his grief over his mother. However, his presence in an integrated military context was a subtle, almost implicit statement in itself. It was a visual representation of a colorblind meritocracy, at least within the military structure, contrasting sharply with the still segregated civilian society he had come from and would return to. His music, regardless of the controversy, undeniably helped to break down racial barriers in popular culture. It introduced black musical forms to white audiences on an unprecedented scale. His integrated service, while not a direct advocacy for civil rights, placed him within an environment that, on paper, practiced a form of racial equality that was still aspirational for much of the nation. Whether this contributed to racial progress is debatable, it certainly didn't stop the criticisms of appropriation. But it showed a superstar, albeit inadvertently, operating within a context that foreshadowed a more integrated America. What we still do not know: how deeply did Elvis's integrated military service actually contribute to broader racial progress in America beyond a symbolic level? And how was this perceived by civil rights leaders or advocates at the time? How did black soldiers serving alongside him truly perceive his presence and their shared experience with a white superstar, especially given the ongoing struggles for equality? Why was there so little public discussion or media focus on the aspect of racial integration during the Elvis in the Army spectacle, given the contemporary civil rights movement? Number 2, a Cold War icon. How did Elvis in uniform fit into America's ideological battle against communism? The late 1950s was the height of the Cold War. It was a global struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union, not just militarily and politically, but ideologically and culturally. Capitalism versus communism, freedom versus authoritarianism. Cultural warfare was a major part of this conflict. America wanted to project an image of a vibrant, free, democratic society, especially to those behind the Iron Curtain and in allied nations. And Elvis Presley, even before the Army, was a symbol of American freedom. His music, while controversial at home, represented a dynamic, consumer-driven youth culture that was distinctly American. His gyrating hips and rebellious spirit, for all their domestic critics, were a sign of expressive freedom that was unthinkable in the Soviet bloc. When Elvis entered the Army, his role in this Cold War narrative shifted and intensified. The military leveraged his image. He was the biggest star in the free world, serving his country just like any other citizen. This showed equality, duty, and patriotism, core American values. It countered Soviet propaganda that often portrayed America as decadent, exploitative, or hypocritical. It demonstrated that even a cultural icon would put country before personal gain. His deployment to West Germany, a frontline state in the Cold War, further cemented this role. He was stationed very close to the Iron Curtain. Images of a clean-cut Elvis in uniform, a disciplined soldier serving his country in Europe, conveyed a powerful message. It merged the appeal of American popular culture with the strength of American military might. He was an ambassador of American ideals, not through speeches, but through his very presence and humble service. He symbolized that American freedom was worth defending. This transformation from rebel to dutiful soldier made him an even more palatable Cold War ambassador. He was less of a threat and more of a son for America. He was proof that the American system could produce both global stars and loyal citizens. His service, therefore, was not just about defending America physically, it was about defending its ideological image on the global stage. What we still do not know: how much did the Army specifically calculate Elvis's propaganda value within the broader context of the Cold War beyond general public relations? How much did the average citizen behind the Iron Curtain truly know or care about Elvis's military service And did it genuinely influence their perceptions of America? Did this good soldier image of Elvis truly change international perceptions of America, or was it largely preaching to countries already aligned with the Western Bloc? Number one, the post-army Elvis. How did this experience shape the rest of his career and public perception? When Elvis Presley was discharged from the army on March 5th, 1960, the world awaited his return. It was a huge event, a massive welcome home, but the Elvis who came back was not quite the same Elvis who had left. The army had profoundly shaped him, and this would define the rest of his career. The immediate impact was a more mature, more mainstream image. The raw, dangerous rebel of the mid-50s was gone. He was now a respected veteran, a nation's son. This made him acceptable to a broader audience, including those conservative parents who had once condemned him. His first post-army album, Elvis is Back, was a critical and commercial success, showcasing a more polished sound, often leaning into ballads. While it still had rock and roll, the wild edge was softened. Colonel Parker, his manager, quickly pivoted to a new strategy movies. The post-army Elvis became a film star, churning out formulaic, often light-hearted musical comedies. Films like G.I. Blues, Blue Hawaii, and Viva Las Vegas were massive box office hits. But they were also criticized for their lack of artistic merit and for sidelining his musical talent. The army had created a clean-cut image, and the movies capitalized on it, turning him into a family-friendly icon. This shift, while financially successful, is often seen as a turning point that stifled his artistic growth. The energy and innovation of his early rock and roll years were largely replaced by a more predictable, commercially driven output. Some argue the army stint, by making him too safe and respectable, fundamentally altered his artistic trajectory. He became less about musical revolution and more about maintaining a marketable image. His public perception also shifted. He was no longer the threat, but a beloved, sometimes nostalgic figure. He became the king, but a domesticated one. This laid the groundwork for his later Vegas years, where he became an entertainment institution rather than a groundbreaking artist. The army experience, intentionally or not, had transformed him from a cultural disruptor into a national treasure, but at a potential cost to his artistic vitality and the wild spirit that first made him famous. What we still do not know, would Elvis have developed into a fundamentally different type of artist if he had never served in the military, perhaps continuing his early rock and roll innovations? Did the army experience truly domesticate him, or was the move towards a safer, more mainstream career an inevitable path for an artist of his magnitude, regardless of his service? Was the safe Elvis, the movie star and balladeer, a compromise he truly wanted, or was it a path largely dictated by Colonel Parker and the circumstances of his post-army image?